At the 2009 World Series of Poker, the cameras were focused on Phil Ivey at the final table, casually munching on an apple, while all his chips were at risk with ace-king. Across the table, a 46-year-old man in a New Orleans Saints cap looked at his cards and found ace-queen. An easy decision for any professional, but Darvin Moon was not any professional. In fact, he was no professional at all. He was a lumberjack from Maryland who lived in a trailer, had no computer or credit card, had invested $130 to get there, and at that moment held 30% of all the chips in play in the biggest tournament in the world. And he now had the chance to eliminate the best player left on the field. After a few seconds, Moon announced the call. The room exploded with excitement. The entire stadium chanted Ivey's name, while Moon stood motionless, waiting for the outcome. Was this lumberjack really about to eliminate the best player in the world? Or would he give him a double up and let the title slip away? Fate would be decided with the next 5 cards.
Darvin Moon, Darvin Moon, Darvin Moon, Darvin Moon, Darvin Moon.
This is the story of the lumberjack who made history at the World Series of Poker. Oakland, Maryland. Population 2,000. If you arrived via the road crossing Backbone Mountain, you saw endless pine forests stretching as far as the eye could see. And somewhere among those trees, you could find Darvin Moon. He lived in a 14 by 70-foot trailer with Wendy, his wife of 26 years. He spent his days cutting timber with a small family business that barely allowed him to survive on $25,000 a year, maybe less, depending on how hard winter hit. The 2008 economic crisis had devastated the lumber business, and Moon felt it every month when he checked his bank account. He had learned to play poker with his grandfather as a child, playing 7-card stud, but it wasn't until 2006 that he discovered Texas Hold'em, and since then he played wherever he could, charity tournaments and home games with friends from town. In March 2009, Moon traveled to Wheeling Island Casino in West Virginia. There was a satellite with a $130 buy-in, and the prize was a $10,000 seat to the main event, plus $6,000 for expenses. Moon lost on his first attempt. He came back the next day and lost again. He returned a third time with his last $130, determined that this would be his final shot, and this time he won. He should have been euphoric, but instead he felt somewhat worried, because $10,000 was a fortune when you barely earned $25,000 a year, and there were bills to pay, and the business needed investment. I was thinking about keeping the money, Moon would later admit in interviews. It could have helped a lot at home, but Wendy told him something that would change everything. "You've wanted to play in the main event for years. Go play it." So Moon did something he had never done before. He bought a plane ticket for his first commercial flight and headed to Las Vegas. July 2009, at the Rio Casino, 6,494 players registered for the main event, accumulating a prize pool exceeding $61 million. Moon, with his New Orleans Saints cap and his small-town style, sat down at his day 1 table, not knowing that day would change his life. He received a pair of aces in one of the first hands, and won a decent pot. Nothing extraordinary. But 2 hours later he received aces again, played them aggressively, someone called, and the flop brought a third ace, giving him a set, and he won another significant pot. Hours later, aces again, and once more he flopped a set. A few orbits later, aces again. This time he didn't flop a set, but it didn't matter, because the pot was his anyway. 5th time, aces. People at the table started muttering, unable to believe this was possible. 6th time, aces. 6 times in a single day, with a set on 3 of those 6 occasions. To put this in perspective, the probability of being dealt aces is 1 in 221 hands. The probability of receiving them 6 times in a single day, and connecting a set 3 times, was absurd. But there was something beyond the aces. Every time Moon put chips in the middle with a marginal hand, he won the pot. Every time he attempted a bluff, it worked perfectly. Every time he faced a tough decision between fold or call, he chose the right option. It was as if poker itself had chosen him for this tournament. He finished day 1 as one of the absolute chip leaders, with a tower of chips that intimidated anyone, and so began the run that would take him into poker history. During the following days of the tournament, ESPN focused its attention on the big stars: Peter Eastgate, Lucky Chewy, Joe Hashem, and the one and only Phil Ivey, who was the heavy public favorite to win the tournament. But on day 6, at one of the outer tables, something extraordinary began to take shape, and this time it was captured on camera. Darvin Moon ended up all in with aces against a player named Brown who held kings. The board brought no help for Brown, and Moon became the chip leader, with fewer than 100 players remaining. From that point on, the poker world began to see the real Darvin Moon. He had a lot of luck in key situations, but he also made impressive plays, standing up to and outplaying top professional players. One of the most crucial hands of Day 8 came against Andrew Lichtenberger, known in the online poker world as Lucky Chewy, a young talent who had dominated the online tables. Lichtenberger had a pair of jacks and raised to 400,000. Moon, with a pair of kings, decided to set a trap with just a call. The flop came 3-3-6, seemingly harmless. Lucky Chewy bet 680,000 with confidence in his jacks. Moon raised to 1.5 million. Chewy, feeling his jacks were still the best hand, and that Moon might be playing a draw or a bluff, went all in for more than 5 million. Moon called instantly without even thinking about it. The kings held and the young pro was eliminated in 18th place, while Moon kept growing as an unstoppable force. And later, Moon executed a perfect bluff with jack high against a continuation bet, an advanced move that the commentators didn't expect from a player who until now had only played ABC poker. With just 2 tables remaining at the end of the day, 9 players would reach the final table, to be played 4 months later in November with the whole world watching. And it was here that Moon starred in the most talked about, most analyzed, and most controversial hand of the entire tournament. 12 players remained. 3 more eliminations and everyone would be guaranteed a seat at the final table, all with more than $1 million secured. The atmosphere in the room was palpably tense. Everyone was playing tight, careful, thinking about reaching that November table, where ESPN's cameras would shine on them and sponsorships awaited. Billy Kopp, just 23 years old and a professional with Ultimate Bet, had one of the largest stacks at the table, with nearly 20 million chips. Darvin Moon had around 25 million. They were seated at the same table for the first time in the entire tournament, and that was about to prove fatal for one of them. The blinds were at 120,000 and 240,000. Kopp, in early position, looked at his cards and saw 5 of diamonds, 3 of diamonds. Nothing spectacular, but Kopp was an aggressive player, and the table was playing conservatively. He raised to 600,000, a standard raise to steal the blinds and antes. Everyone folded around the table until the action reached Moon in the small blind. Moon looked at his cards, Queen of Diamonds, Jack of Diamonds, and called the 600,000 without much thought. The player in the big blind got out of the way. The pot had 1.6 million when the dealer burned a card and revealed the flop. King of Diamonds, 9 of Diamonds, 2 of Diamonds, all diamonds. Moon checked. Kopp, thinking his small flush was probably good and wanting to build the pot, bet 750,000. This is where Moon executed the most lethal slow play. He simply called. No raise to represent strength, no move to push Kopp out. He just called calmly, letting Kopp believe he might have a pair or a draw, inviting him to bet more on future streets. The pot now had 3.1 million. Turn, 2 of clubs. The board paired with the 2, meaning a full house was now possible. Moon checked again. Kopp decided to keep betting hard to protect his flush. 2 million went into the middle. Moon looked at him and then attacked. He raised to 6 million. Kopp was just 3 spots away from the final table, 3 eliminations from glory. He had 16 million remaining in his stack. The pot now had 11 million. If he folded, he'd only lose a little more than 3 million in this hand, but he'd stay alive for the November 9 with a decent stack. If he went all in and lost, he'd go home instead of achieving the eternal glory of the final table. And then, he made one of the worst mistakes in main event history. Kopp declared, all in. 18 million total were pushed to the center of the table. Moon called without overthinking it, and Kopp didn't expect what he was about to see. Kopp had literally 0 outs. Moon had the second best flush possible, leaving his opponent drawing dead from the moment the turn appeared. Billy was eliminated in 12th place, with $896,730. Darvin dragged a massive pot of 40 million chips to his side of the table, approximately a quarter of all chips in play, with just 11 players remaining. After Phil Ivey eliminated Robbins, 10 players remained. Just one more had to fall for the November 9 to be complete. Jordan Smith had a decent but not enormous stack. Moon remained a towering, threatening force, and in the hand that would define who reached the November 9 and who went home with the devastating title of Bubble Boy, something brutal happened. Smith received aces, the same aces Moon had received 6 times on day 1. Moon had a pair of 8s, a decent hand but clearly dominated, until the flop came out, 8-4-2. A set for Moon, again, as if the poker gods couldn't resist giving him sets when he needed them most. Smith checked, trying to trap, convinced his aces was still good. Moon bet 4 million. Smith went all in, putting everything at risk, and was called immediately. Turn 5, river 10. Jordan Smith was eliminated in 10th place, the last man before the November 9, the one left out of history while the other 9 would live forever in the legend of poker. Darvin Moon entered the 2009 final table as the absolute chip leader with 58.9 million chips, nearly 30% of all chips in play. The November 9 was sealed, and Moon, the lumberjack from Maryland, who had invested $130 in a satellite at a West Virginia casino, was sitting at the top of the poker world. From July to November 2009, the final table was frozen for 4 months. This was the November 9 format. The last 9 players waited until November to play the final table on television, in prime time, with millions of eyes watching. Moon went back to Maryland and his life as a lumberjack, but now he had something completely different. Offers. Lots of offers. Poker stars in full tilt wanted to sponsor him. Other online poker sites were lining up with 6-figure contracts. All he had to do was wear their logo at the final table and appear at some promotional events. Easy money. More than he made in an entire year cutting trees, but Moon said no to all of them without a second thought. "I don't want to answer to anyone," he explained with the stubbornness of someone who values his independence above any amount of money. "I've never played online poker. I'm not going to promote something I don't believe in. If I sign with them, they're going to want me to go where they tell me, when they tell me." Journalists couldn't believe what they were hearing. That was Darvin Moon, the man who didn't change for money. The final table waiting for him in November was an unprecedented event, and Moon, with the honesty that defined him, said, "There were 6,494 players in this tournament, and probably 6,300 of them are better than me. And among all those talented players seated at the final table, there was one who drew more attention than all the others. Phil Ivey. 7 WSOP bracelets at that point. Respected by every professional as the best player in the world. The man who had never won the main event but had come close several times. And everyone expected this to be his year. The question everyone asked during those 4 endless months was simple but monumental. Can a lumberjack from Maryland beat Phil Ivey, the best poker player on the planet? November would bring the answer, and that answer would shatter every expectation. November 7th, 2009, the Penn and Teller Theater at the Rio Casino in Las Vegas. The lights blazed with intensity. Cameras captured every angle. The stands were packed with fans. This was the event of the year, and it started with all the action. James Aikenhead was the first to fall. He had a pair of 3s and went all in against Kevin Schaffel's pair of 9s. The board brought no help, and Aikenhead said goodbye with dignity, pocketing $1,263,602 for 9th place. Schaffel briefly celebrated the elimination, but just a few hands later, his own name would be called under even more dramatic circumstances. He had a pair of aces. Eric Buchman had kings. Everything went in the middle pre-flop in what should have been a celebration for Schaffel, but the flop brought a king, giving Buchman a set, and then the turn brought the finishing blow. Another king, completing 4 of a kind. Schaffel's aces were now worthless. Eliminated in 8th place with $1,300,228. Schaffel left the stage in shock. 7 players remained, and then came the moment most of the audience had dreaded. Phil Ivey had been playing aggressively at the right moments, and patiently when the situation required it, but he was short on chips after some lost hands, and desperately needed to double up. The blinds were at 300,000 and 600,000, with a 75,000 ante. Ivey looked at his cards in early position, and saw ace-king, big slick, and as if it were just another day at the office, he announced in a firm voice, "All in." Everyone folded one by one around the table until the action reached Moon in the big blind. He looked at his cards and saw ace-queen. He had the chips to call and survive even if he lost, so it was an easy decision. Call. The cards were turned face up for everyone and ESPN's cameras. Ivey was completely dominating, with a 75% probability of winning the hand. The dealer burned a card, and the entire Penn and Teller Theater held its breath collectively. Ivey's fans rose from their seats, ready to erupt in celebration, when their idol doubled up and returned to battle. But they weren't ready for what came next.
Phil Ivey all in. Here's the flop. Oh, and there's a queen! And that sent a dagger through the hopes of Phil Ivey.
My goodness. We're going to need a medic to the broadcast booth.
Not many are celebrating that queen, but the Moons certainly are.
How do they put in right away?
Like the mouth just read my mind. In 2003, everyman Chris Moneymaker took out Ivey with ace-queen. Now, 6 years later, another everyman, Darvin Moon, is poised to take out Ivey with ace-queen again.
All right, the turn card now. Ivey needing help. The tray of clubs is no help.
Close.
He still has a sense of humor.
Phil possibly in the middle of his main event demise. He takes it matter-of-factly. If it has to be anyone, I guess I'm glad it's Darvin Moon who's doing the deed.
Phil Ivey staring elimination right in the face.
Ivey needs a king and a king only, or his 2009 main event is over.
River card is a 5, and that will do it. Phil Ivey eliminated in 7th place from this 2009 main event.
Phil Ivey was eliminated in 7th place with $1,404,014. The entire theater rose in a standing ovation of respect. The best player in the world had just been eliminated by an amateur. 6 players remained, and Moon wasn't done breaking hearts. Stephen Begleiter, a former Bear Stearns executive who had left the world of Wall Street to pursue professional poker. He had a pair of queens when the money went in pre-flop. Moon had ace-queen once again. Begleiter was the favorite and just needed the cards to hold to survive and keep fighting. The flop fell with no help from Moon. The turn didn't bring anything either. Begleiter was 1 card away from winning the hand and growing his stack, but the river brought an ace. Moon connected his ace on the river and didn't even flinch. Begleiter was eliminated in 6th place with $1,587,160. The victim of another improbable blow. Moon reclaimed the chip lead with 63.9 million chips, cementing himself as the championship favorite. The rest of the night became a whirlwind of consecutive eliminations. Jeff Shulman fell in 5th place with a pair of 7s, losing to ace-9. Eric Buckman was eliminated in 4th with ace-5, beaten by Moon's suited king-jack, a hand that once again showed the cards seemed to love the lumberjack. Antoine Sau finished 3rd with a pair of 8s, losing to Joe Cada's ace-king when a king appeared on the river at the most decisive moment. And when the smoke finally cleared, only 2 players remained. Joe Cada, 135,950,000 chips. Darvin Moon, 58,850,000 chips. The heads-up would begin in 2 days. Monday, November 9th. The amateur versus the professional. The lumberjack versus the online grinder. Maryland versus Michigan. The final battle for $8.5 million and the title of world champion was about to begin. Joe had been playing poker professionally for 5 years since he was just 16. On PokerStars, he played 2,000 hands a day against the best in the world, and he was an absolute expert in heads-up, the hardest format in poker. Darvin Moon had only been playing Texas Hold'em seriously for 3 years. Only live home games with friends from town, and 0 experience in one-on-one play. But from the very first hand, he surprised the young player. The first significant hand of the heads-up arrived quickly. The blinds were at 500,000 and 1 million. Moon on the button received a pair of queens, a premium hand. But Moon did something that baffled the commentators. He just called the blind. Joe looked at his pair of 9s and raised to 3.5 million, thinking Moon was weak. Moon called calmly, keeping the trap hidden. The flop came, 3, king, 2. Joe bet 3.5 million as a continuation bet. Moon, with his queens, raised to 10 million. Joe sensed danger immediately, but decided to call and see what happened. The turn was an ace. Cada checked cautiously. Moon grabbed 2 stacks and bet 10 million with confidence. Joe thought carefully, still not convinced, and decided to call one more time. They arrived at the river, which was another king, and this time, the action was check-check. Darvin quickly showed his queens, and Joe couldn't believe he had held that hand. Moon won a pot of 47 million on the first significant hand. The chip gap was closing dramatically. The next 2 hours were a war of absolute attrition. Moon won mid-sized pots by pressing with aggressive raises and slowly clawed his way back. And then something nobody expected happened. After several hours of battle, the lumberjack looked at his stack and saw he had taken the lead. 133 million for Moon against 61 million for Cada. And later came hand 79, the hand that would decide absolutely everything. The momentum was on Moon's side, the energy of the crowd too. Even fate seemed to be with him. Everything pointed to this being his night and his moment in history. But on the next hand, perhaps he got overconfident and it got away from him. Cada raised pre-flop from the button. Moon called from the big blind. The flop fell. 10, 5, 9. Both checked, neither wanting to commit without more information. The turn brought another 10, pairing the board. Moon had 8-7, an open-ended straight draw, meaning any 6 or any jack would give him the winning straight. He had 7 outs to win the hand. Cada had jack-9, making 2 pair, 9s and 10s. A hand strong enough to bet 3 million, trying to protect it. Moon looked at the chips in the center, looked at the board, looked at Cada searching for any sign. And then he did something that would completely change the course of history. Check raise, all in for 58 million chips. A massive overbet. The Penn and Teller Theater froze completely. Joe sank into his chair and had to make the most important decision of his life. He had two pair, a strong hand in any context, but the board was paired, which meant Moon could have trips or a full house. A monster hand that would destroy him, but Moon could also have absolutely nothing, just a draw or a pure bluff. Moon had been playing aggressively all night and had been pressing constantly. 5 full minutes of silent deliberation. Carter relived the hand in his mind over and over, and then something clicked. If Moon had trip tens or a full house, he probably wouldn't make this bet. He lifted his head and said, "Call," almost fearfully. The cards were turned face up. Moon showed 8-7. He had 7 clean outs to win the hand. Any 6 or any jack would give him the straight, the pot, and the ultimate victory.
Darvin Moon's over-aggressive play may be handing the reins back to Joe Cata, but if Moon can hit the river, he will be the most unlikely world champion ever. We have seen both of these players catch cards at this final table. Right now, Joe Cata needs to dodge danger to survive.
Darvin's still got 7 outs to complete his improbable journey. With a jack or a 6 on the river, Darvin Moon will be the main event champion.
The river card is a tray. Joe Cata doubles up.
Cata won the pot of 122 million chips. He reclaimed the chip lead and with it reclaimed all the momentum of the battle. The tournament had just changed hands on a single card. After this devastating hand, Darvin never fully recovered. He tried with everything he had, but Cata now had the chips and the heads-up experience. He knew exactly that he just needed to wait for the right moment to deliver the final blow. Hand 88 of the heads-up arrived with the inevitability of fate. The blinds were at 600,000 and 1,200,000. Cata had a pair of 9s and raised to 3 million. Moon had Queen of Diamonds, Jack of Diamonds, and 3-bet to 8 million. Joe decided this was the right moment and declared all in, putting his opponent at risk of elimination. Moon, with his Queen Jack of Diamonds, the same hand that had given him the chip lead on day 8 against Billy Kopp, made his final decision.
Call. And Darvin makes the call with his suited Queen Jack.
Wow, Darvin plays by different rules, and he makes that all-in call for 64 million.
So here we go, Joe Cata on the precipice of becoming the youngest world champion ever.
Phil Hellmuth's record as youngest main event champ stood for 19 years. Peter Eastgate's record could be wiped out in 1.
And here is the flop. 8-7. That is a good flop for Joe Cata.
Darvin takes it in stoically. Cata can't look.
Relax.
That chant has gotten Cata through so many difficult moments. And now the turn card. It's a king. That's the only paint Darvin doesn't have.
The main event champion of the world.
On day 3, Cata jokingly told Peter Eastgate he would break his record. Now he's 1 card away from doing it. Darvin Moon needs a queen or a jack, or Joe Cata will be the main event champ.
And that 7 will end it. Joe Cata rewrites poker history, becoming the youngest main event champ ever.
You played a hell of a match. Good hand. You played a hell of a match. Seriously, all props on that.
After the final hand, Joe Cata and Darvin Moon shook hands in front of the cameras. Cata was declared world champion, and the audience responded with a prolonged ovation at the Penn and Teller Theater. The ovation was not only for the winner, it was also for Darvin Moon, the amateur who had made it to the heads-up of the main event, completing one of the most improbable stories in modern poker. Joe Cata, 2009 WSOP main event world champion, 21 years old, $8,546,435. Darvin Moon, runner-up, 46 years old, $5,182,928. Darvin Moon returned to Maryland a few days after the tournament. He went back to his work as a lumberjack and to the life he had always led. Despite having been just a few hands away from being world champion, he didn't change the way he lived. After 2009, he played very little poker. He preferred small games and games with friends, far from the professional circuit and the spotlight. On September 19, 2020, Darvin Moon passed away at the age of 56 from complications following surgery. From a $130 satellite to $5 million, from the forests of Maryland to the heads-up of the WSOP main event, and forever remembered as the protagonist of one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of poker.